Welcome to the Gospel Addict podcast. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Welcome back to the Gospel Addict podcast. I'm your host, Bryan. I'm joined with two good friends. And the cool thing is the three of us just got back from Greece a few weeks ago, and we're calling this episode Greece Part 2. Anthony Silano is joining from California. How's the weather out there? No, don't talk about it. I know it's going to be great. But how are you doing?
It's actually a little cold today.
Cold?
Actually a little cold. Yes.
No way.
Yeah, about 58 degrees.
Is that right?
Freezing by our standards.
Wow. We're glad to have you on the show. And we have Jamey Cihak and his wife, Jamey, also with us. Jamey, you are muted, just so you know. Craig, how you doing?
I'm doing well, brother. Doing well. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about, as far as people getting to know you, where you're living, anything about you?
Yes. Well, we live in San Antonio. We've been here about 10 years, and we're with the Navigators, focusing on international students. And we've been with them about 22 years. And my wife's from Florida. I'm from Iowa, but we met in the great state of California. So, and now we're here in Texas, and we love it here. And glad to be on the podcast. Thank you. And I'll let Jamey add anything to that if she wants to. You're on mute again, Jamey.
Yeah, Jamey, would you like to say something?
Sure. Hi. It's good talking with you, Greg. Yeah, we had a really great.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying we had a really great trip.
Yeah, and we want to, let's dive in. That's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the things that really stood out to us. Just for our anybody listening for the first time, we went to Greece and we followed the Apostle Paul's second missionary journey, recorded in Acts chapter 16 to 18. And our journey started out in Neapolis, which is where the Apostle Paul, he received a vision from a man of Macedonia to come over to there. He was heading in a different direction, but then God gave him this vision, and he ends up in Europe. And so we actually went to the port city that he came into, and then we went to this place where he met Lydia, who ends up being the very first convert in Europe. And it was really, really cool. So Craig and Jamey, I'd like you guys to share what were some of the highlights for you.
Yeah, Jamey, go ahead. You wanted to share, and about and tie it to Matthew 13 about the mustard seed. Why don't you go ahead and share with that, Jamey?
Okay. Well, what I've been telling friends, Greg, who asked me, how the trip impacted me, was that when we got there to Philippi, it was nice being by the river. And then we went to the ancient city and we saw all the ruins spread out. We were up higher and we were looking down on it, and we saw temples, and we saw the Greek agora, which is later turned into a forum, meeting places for speakers, shops, and all kinds of other structures. We got to see the prison where Paul was held. And I was just picturing what it would have looked like with the roof still on, with everything intact. And I could almost feel and hear, and see the, tons of people around there, thousands of people all bustling around. And I could just imagine Paul, Silas, and Timothy walking in there, and they're holding this gift. This gift, it's the gospel that probably no one there has. There weren't even enough Jewish believers there to form a synagogue. They would have needed 10 Jewish men. That's why Lydia and some other women were having their prayer meetings down by the river. But what do you do when you're trying to share the gospel, the greatest news ever? And, how do you even start? How do you even start with that? And it seemed like it was a very inauspicious beginning. It says that after they made their way to found the ladies at the river, I read in a book that it was like after they had been there 2 weeks, they found these ladies who were believers. And it says that God helped Lydia to pay attention to Paul's message. And so she was eager to be baptized, she and her household, and asked him to, come and stay with them. But it doesn't say anything about the other women, so the other women maybe didn't believe. All we know that believed in that first visit was Lydia and her household, the jailer and his household after the miracle of the earthquake. And, Paul and Silas didn't escape after the earthquake. And then maybe the servant girl who Paul cast a demon out of. That's all that we know were the first converts. And Paul basically got chased out of town and didn't come back for 4 or 5 years. And so somehow things started with that very tiny mustard seed and then just spread. And that was just the beginning. But it's kind of like a little spark, getting into some chaff, some tinder, and then it just, turning into a raging wildfire. To see, that now Greece isn't, full of temples and pagan gods and all of that. And, the mythology, it's part of their culture and their history, but they have a cross on their flag. And supposedly, I think 97%, give or take, of the Greek people are part of the Greek Orthodox Church. They're probably not all believers by any means, but probably many people who are God-fearing and have, know the story about Christ and have access to a Bible. So it's just like, wow, that like nation was overtaken, and transformed by the gospel. So that's what was just very exciting for me to see how it started out so tiny, and it's God who caused the growth.
That's awesome. So that reminded you of like that parable of the mustard seed.
Yeah, did you have that, Craig? Craig was reading it to me earlier.
May I read that? It's
please. Please.
Yeah, so it's found in Matthew 13, 31 through 33. It says, it's talking about Jesus here. So Jesus, he presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And this is the smaller than all other seeds. But when it is full grown, it is larger than the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air can come and nest in its branches. And as Jamey said, I think exactly what happened. That seed was so small and it grew so big. And that's the kingdom of God. That's what it can do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Paul had this vision of a man saying, come over to Macedonia. So you would think that in the vision, he would meet a man. You think he would you think he would meet that man, right? Whoever that man was in his vision, that's the guy that would be the first convert in Europe. But no, he goes to the, he goes to the city, but, that's not where he ends up meeting somebody that's open to the gospel. He ends up by this river that's outside the city, which we were able to contextualize and get a feel for like how close the river was to where the city was. And this is where a group of women who feared God met on the Sabbath. And that's where he met Lydia. And I just think it's so funny that, because, if you were making this up, and I love this, people that say the Bible's just made up. First of all, you would never make the first convert in Europe a woman in that time.
Right.
Yeah, you just wouldn't, because women didn't have the rights that they have today in that cultural context. And then like I said, the obvious thing would be if he had this vision of this man that when he gets to Europe, when he gets to Greece, that he's going to meet that man from the vision. but
Mhm.
we have no indication that he ever met that man, which maybe the man was Jesus, or maybe, an angel or something. But Craig, what about you? Like, what stood out to you? So we started out in northern Greece, where Paul first came, and then we followed his journey, his second missionary journey, and we traveled a long way. We got to, went to Philippi, which we've talked about a little bit. Then we, ended up in Athens. We saw Corinth, and it just in Thessaloniki, which was interesting. Berea, that's right. We went to
Yeah.
Berea. So it was just so cool to follow in his footsteps. And you realize he traveled like 10,000 miles on his missionary journeys. And most of that was on foot. That was not with, he was not riding in an Accord, a Honda Accord, even though it says the disciples rode together in an Accord.
Yeah.
He,
Right.
I mean, it's just amazing the amount, the distance that Paul traveled, and that his commitment to spreading the gospel wherever he was. But Craig, what stood out to you from our trip?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, back to what you're just saying about Lydia, and how, Paul didn't see a man, but he saw these women and she opened her heart. It harkens back to me, doesn't it, to the resurrected Christ appearing to the women first, right? So they got to hear the gospel, see the died, rose again, right? And so the resurrection message that Paul was bringing to Macedonia, the women heard first. So I just think that's so cool of God to do that. And I would presume, as you just said, in the Jewish culture, Greek culture, the culture of that day, women didn't have the status they had today. And so God just, shows people that, hey, the gospel's for everybody, everywhere, all the time. And I'm going to reveal it to who I want, when I want, how I want. And so I just think that's beautiful. So I got three takeaways, and I'll just briefly mention them. And if you want me to go in more to them, I will. But one I got was after, or actually during our time in Greece. I don't know when it was. I start mainly listening to First Corinthians and Second Corinthians and Thessalonians and Philippians again, and it just really came alive for me, as we've talked before. Just going there and seeing it, and so I saw also, and I had these looked up, but to save time, in Thessalonians and in Philippians, he talks about how much he cares for them and prays for them, constantly remembering them in prayer. I think the first chapter in each book, First Thessalonians and Philippians, and day and night mention you and fond affectionate for you, and I just saw the love Paul had, and you could tell he had love for them because of all the dangers that he went through to get the gospel there. And it just made me like, this is really dangerous. These high mountains, animals, thieves, robbers on the Romans road. What's he going to do for food? What happens if he sprains his ankle or gets cut? I used to be a nurse. I'm like, wow, did he know first aid? So you have all these other things that you get time to think about that I really haven't thought about just sitting here in America reading my Bible. So that was just amazing to see the love. And so that's what I want. I want to say, Lord, give me this love so much that, all these risks are just, my love just swallows my fear. You know what I mean? And so I saw that as I was there, and continue to see it now when I look at those epistles. And then the other thing I think was mentioned on your first broadcast was how the Roman roads, connected the world today, and how today our Roman roads is the internet that connects the world today. And on those Roman roads, they were used for good and for bad. There were thieves there. There were armies going for good and bad reason. But there was a lot of good that happened. People got supplies, people got communication. An army could go here and defend a city. And that's the same thing with the internet. It's kind of double-edged sword. So I think my application would be, keep up on the internet, use social media, use whatever God is telling us to use individually and corporately to get the gospel out to the world that we know today. And then finally, I just think that the Greece was a culture that, as we saw all these idols, and we went to Delphi, all these the oracle and all this evil and decadence and sexual deviations. And that's a lot like our culture is today. I mean, we're kind of like that, and so much more in the last 5 years. But look, the gospel penetrated there, and as Jamey said, grew out. And look, they have a flag on their, or they have a cross on their, a cross on their flag today. And I just think that's possible. So for me, I have hope that no matter how deviant, how evil, how sexually deviant a culture can be, that the gospel, this mustard seed, can overcome it. But I will say, though, that I saw how much Paul prayed for them. And I really think the key to their success was this praying and praying and praying, this intense love, not only to go there, not only to stand there and preach and write these letters, but yeah, truly, he was all out Paul. I mean, and so that's a challenge for me. So those are the things that I walked away with, I think, that are probably most significant to me.
That's awesome. We may get back into some of those. Thanks for sharing those, Craig. Anthony, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but Craig, you mentioned about the internet being the Roman road for today. And I think one of the things that excites me about this podcast is I'm just looking in the last 30 days, people have listened to this podcast in Australia, in Indonesia, in India, in Kenya, Zambia, Ukraine, Estonia, Germany, United Kingdom, Ireland, Spain, Brazil, Bolivia, and then of course, Canada, United States, Guatemala. Anyway, it's just so cool.
Wow.
It's so cool to me because
You're making me nervous now.
I don't feel like I have friends in all those countries, but I think it's so cool that people can hear about Jesus in those countries just by listening to a podcast, because we believe the gospel of Jesus is the best news ever. I mean, what Jesus did for us is the best news, and it's for all people. It's not, just for, and Christians need to hear the gospel just as much as non-Christians, so
Yeah.
But Anthony, let me go to you. Anything you'd like to add at this point?
Well, thank you, Jamey and Craig, for sharing your insights. That was beautiful. And I was certainly, as you were sharing, reflecting on just how counterintuitive that God works. His ways are not our ways. And just thinking of the fact that he appeared, that Lydia was the first convert in Europe, and that he appeared to women who at the time didn't have the same rights as men. And it's just such a testament to God's love and care for the least of these. And I was just, as you were sharing, just reflecting on that, and just how the ways that I feel like God has worked in my life at times when I was at my lowest, and just how the gospel and his good news has lifted me up and opened up opportunities and connected me with people that I didn't think was possible. And it's just a beautiful reminder of just God's heart for people. And I loved reflecting on that as you were sharing.
Excellent.
Amen.
Yeah.
What's something interesting, though, is, we're talking about how the women didn't have the rights, and I think that's really true. But interestingly, Lydia was almost, pressed Paul and his group to stay with her,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of almost insisted. And she must have been of some means, because of her profession, the dyer of purple cloth. That was, so expensive. Usually only royalty could afford that. So I think she did have some money. And then later you see Paul commending the Philippians for their financial support of his ministry when he goes to different places.
Right.
And Lydia could have been part of that, and her, her business. And as we were watching The Chosen and such like that, and, reading more of the scriptures about Jesus traveling around with his disciples, it says, and the women who were with them, some of whom supported him out of their means. So, women, like kind of, there were significant women underwriting some of, some of the gospel being spread. So that's an
absolutely.
interesting take that, I don't know that I had considered before.
Wow. So despite
Yeah.
them being pressed down, they were still entrepreneurs and making money. It's even more remarkable.
And
It
they were
Yeah,
using the
is.
money for
and
the kingdom, though. I mean,
I
using
love
the money for
the
the
I love the diversity of the churches too. Like you guys mentioned, you had Lydia, who was let's say a wealthy businesswoman. Then you had this slave girl who
Right.
had a spirit, was possessed by a demon and got rescued by the gospel. And then you had the jailer and his family.
Mhm.
I mean, think about the diversity of the churches, and how,
Mhm.
again, the gospel wasn't just for the upper class or the middle class or the lower class. It was for all classes. And
Yes.
I just think that's so cool. Hey, let's jump forward.
I,
What about Athens? Let's talk about like Mars Hill,
Yeah.
what it was like. Were you guys disappointed with Mars Hill?
well, I was confused when we first got up there and we were filming that little video where we were taking turns reading verses, because it was such like rocky and bumpy. I was like, I'm gonna fall over at any moment. I was like, surely this is not a meeting place. But then later we started exploring the mound and we got to the other side where there were really great flat areas. And why they chose to meet up there, I don't know exactly, because we had a stairway to go up, but otherwise it would have been a little bit of a climb. But it was apparently the place where they did I think where they held murder trials and they had council meetings. So when we saw the large flat areas, we saw, oh, okay, this makes sense now. And I guess they did have a good view. But it was exciting to be there. And to just think, that's where, where Paul delivered the message that's recorded in Acts, although that's probably Luke's summary. Supposedly it was much longer than that. But some people were interested and wanted to hear more after that. So that was neat. He had a very different reception and approach in Athens than he did, in Philippi, because there were, a lot more people who were there to listen to him. But I think he was there alone initially, and
Yeah. Right.
and maybe kind of discouraged and concerned about the church and Thessaloniki and Philippi and such. So I'm not sure he even stayed there long, but there sure is evidence of the Greeks leaving all kinds of buildings there up on the Acropolis. It's all lifted up. We can see it from our hotel. You can see it from all over Athens. This stuff up on the up on a mountaintop,
Acropolis.
so to speak. Yeah,
Mhm.
very prominent.
Anthony, what did you think about Mars Hill? What was your experience there?
I was surprised by it. I was expecting something more grand, to be honest with you. It kind of reminded me of the narthex of the Acropolis, like kind of it's kind of on the outskirts. And yeah, I was a bit surprised by it. I guess I had always envisioned it being much, and it is an amazing view from up there, but it was different than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be bigger, and I thought there would be more. I guess in my mind, I always pictured similar ruins there as the Acropolis, where you have different pillars, and
That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I thought it would be like very similar to the Acropolis.
But it's just a mound of rocks it is a spectacular view up there. But you definitely have to be careful, because as I was walking around, I was getting closer to the edge, and it's like, oh my gosh, if you weren't paying attention, you could have quite the fall from up there. So
Yeah,
I was surprised by that too, kind of the lack of guardrails towards the edge.
Oh yeah.
But
Maybe that's what they did in the murder trials. If they found someone to be guilty, they just gave him a little shove.
It makes you wonder, because that would be a place that
they might
send
have
somebody to their doom for sure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, On your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace. And on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.